Battle of Petrikowka unfolded against the vast, unyielding expanses of the Eastern Front, a theatre that stretched from the Baltic to the Black Sea, where endless plains and muddy rivers shaped the fate of armies. By the autumn of 1941, the Italian forces, part of the Corpo di Spedizione Italiano in Russia, CSIR, had joined Germany's advance into Ukraine, driven by ambition and alliance. For Italy, this campaign was more than an act of solidarity with Berlin. It was a chance to prove its military worth, to carve a place for itself in the grand strategy of Axis conquest, and to demonstrate its capacity to fight on the same scale as its German ally. Along the broad Dnieper River and near the small village of Petrikowka, Italian troops would face their first great test on Soviet soil. The landscape, flattened by war and scarred by retreating Soviet forces, was alien to soldiers more accustomed to the Mediterranean terrain. Yet it was here that the Regio Esercito sought to assert itself, blending determination with the hope of securing recognition and influence within the Axis war effort. Italy's commitment to the Eastern Front was rooted in its political and military alliance with Germany, a partnership forged through shared ambitions and ideological alignment. In the summer of 1941, that alliance took concrete shape with the deployment of the CSIR, a force tasked not simply with participation, but with playing a defined strategic role within Germany's grand campaign in Ukraine. The CSIR was integrated into the German Heeresgruppe Süd, in English the Army Group South, commanded by Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt. Army Group South was tasked with taking the Donbass region in Ukraine. Seizing the crucial industrial districts would be a critical part of Hitler's Operation Barbarossa. Within this vast formation, the Italian contingent was attached to Panzer Group 1, the powerful mechanised spearhead driving deep into Soviet territory. This group was commanded by Ewald von Kleist, and CSIR commander General Giovanni Messer would cooperate with and even take orders from von Kleist, as well as von Rundstedt, who had overall command of the army group. Messer did not always find it easy cooperating with the Germans overestimating the capabilities of the Italian CSIR, mainly in its mobilisation. The Italian divisions did not have enough auto-transporters for all of the infantry. Nevertheless, the Italians were determined to prove their worth on the battlefield during the early months of Operation Barbarossa. While the German armour thrust toward decisive objectives, the CSIR's mission was to guard Panzer Group 1's flank, ensuring that the fast-moving tanks could advance without being cut off or encircled by counter-attacks, a vital role in the fluid and dangerous battles of the steppe. The broader plan centred on the Battle of Kiev, an immense encirclement designed to trap and destroy Soviet forces west of the Dnieper. By capturing key positions and maintaining secure bridgeheads to the south approaching Kiev, the Axis strategy aimed to open corridors for German tanks to push forward without hindrance. Within this context, the seizure of Petrikowka was not an isolated skirmish, but a deliberate step in tightening the encirclement. Holding Petrikowka meant controlling a crucial section of the Dnieper's approaches, removing Soviet resistance from the path of advance, and enabling German armour to exploit captured crossings. As the Italians secured the flank and reinforced bridgeheads, they directly contributed to the momentum of the drive on Kiev, an operation whose scale was measured in hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops caught in the tightening noose. By binding their fate to the German mechanised offensive, the Italian Expeditionary Corps sought both battlefield success and political recognition, carving a place in one of the most ambitious operations of the Eastern Front. As the Axis armies swept through Ukraine, the success of the entire offensive hinged on securing and holding key bridgeheads across rivers like the Orel and the Dnieper. For the Italian forces, and particularly the experienced 9th Infantry Division Pasubio, these missions demanded resolve, coordination, and combat skill. The tension mounted as the Pasubio Division pushed forward, establishing an important bridgehead at Tserechanka, across the Ural River. The division had been transferred temporarily to the 17th Army. This achievement was critical. Controlling crossings allowed the Axis to funnel troops, tanks and equipment deeper into Soviet territory while setting up the next move southward toward Petrikowka. Each bridgehead became a magnet for enemy resistance, knowing that losing such a point meant opening the road for Axis advances, especially for the armoured might of the 17th Army. Tactics for capturing these bridgeheads relied on swift infantry assaults. Riflemen surged across the steppes with covering fire from machine gun squads. Artillery would be pounding the steppes from both ally and enemy. Infantry movements often involved difficult advances and defensive operations under constant Soviet artillery, made worse if there were Soviet tanks present too. Sometimes the Italian forces would be spread thinly across the offensive lines as they closed in on enemy positions. Soviet artillery barrages frequently preceded infantry assaults, severely impacting Italian defensive or offensive positions. The fighting was marked by intense shelling and bombardments, assaults attempting to seize key strategic points. The Italian infantry carried mainly Carcano rifles. These were standard issue weapons in various models, offering reliability and decent range. This was a family of carbine rifles, common at the time. Fire support came from either the Breda Modello 30 light machine gun and the heavy machine gun, the Breda Modello 37, both having a low rate of fire, and possibly the older Fiat Modello 35 machine guns too. The machine gun crews positioned their weapons to command the approaches to the bridgehead. Strategic placement allowed for overlapping fields of fire, creating deadly lanes where any Soviet counterattack or reinforcement could be met with sustained bursts. Often machine gun squads would operate together, providing overlapping fire to cover the weaknesses of slow fire rates of their machine guns, particularly the Breda Modello 30. Riflemen could also find surrounding dug-in positions around the river, providing covering fire and maintaining fire suppression. Once on the far bank, the Italians rapidly shifted from offence to defence, hastily dug trenches, sandbag emplacements and interlocked machine gun positions, made the bridgehead a fortress under siege. Every hour held against probing Soviet attacks was another hour closer to the arrival of reinforcements, turning a slim foothold into a launch point for further advances. The bridgehead at Tserichanka held for 3 days, and the Soviets were unable to dislodge Posubio from its dug-in positions. The division fought so well that it was able to secure another bridgehead further north. This paved the way for German tanks to cross the Ural River and advance further into the Donbass region. By mastering these river crossings and holding bridgeheads under fire, Posubio and other Italian divisions not only paved the way for armoured exploitation, but helped knit together the chain of positions vital to the Axis encirclement operations. The Italians impressed the Germans during the early months of Operation Barbarossa, with effective mobilisation, forward advances, and securing key bridgeheads, towns and cities. Even Mussolini travelled to the Eastern Front for a short period to congratulate the troops who were doing Italy proud. Capturing bridgeheads across the Ukrainian and Russian landscapes with its vast open steppes and intertwining rivers was a key strategy to the campaign. It was vital for maintaining the Germans' armoured push. The clash at Petrikowka would be shaped by the hard-won success of such precarious outposts. General Giovanni Messa, commander of the CSIR, planned a double-pronged attack. This would be an independently executed operation for the Italian forces, the Posubio Division attacking from the northwest and the 52nd Infantry Division Torino attacking from the southeast. The Torino Division's advance was launched from secured bridgeheads further south along the Dnieper River. The two divisions would eventually converge on the small town of Petrikowka to cut off Soviet retreat routes, forcing Soviet divisions into a narrowing pocket. The Posubio forces had recently executed daring manoeuvres, crossing minefields and establishing bridgeheads, notably at Tserichanka, which facilitated the crossing of German and Italian armoured units over the Ural and Dnieper rivers. The Posubio Division, now detached from the German 17th Army and part of the CSIR operation, acted as the spearhead in the encirclement, with units advancing through yet more treacherous minefields and tackling Soviet defences fiercely. On the 28th of September 1941, the Torino Division, accompanied by the 63rd Assault Blackshirt Legion Tagliamento, launched an aggressive attack from the southeast against the Soviet 47th Tank Division and its supporting infantry, overcoming stiff defences despite the presence of minefields and Soviet light tanks, which were outdated and scheduled for replacement. The attack came in the form of a bayonet charge which forced back Soviet resistance, enabling the Italians to regain a bridgehead south of Petrikowka. The 3rd Celeri Principi Amadeo Duca d'Aosta Division, who, along with the main corps of CSIR, were positioned south of the Dnieper River. The division supported the effort by sending 2 Bersaglieri battalions across the Dnieper to tighten the encirclement, conducting sweeping operations later. All 3 units, the Vesubio, Torino and the 2 battalions of the 3rd Celeri, would unite in Petrikowka, blocking Soviet exit routes. Fighting for the Soviet Union, the 47th Tank Division of the 18th Mechanized Corps, positioned in and around the town. The commander of this division around the time of 1941 was Colonel Georgy Semyonovich Rodin. It is likely his orders and strategic objective was to hold a defensive line at Petrikowka and hold out for as long as possible. The 47th Tank Division was lightly equipped, none of the modern T-34 or KV-1 tanks, and primarily fielded older light tanks such as the T-26. Their defences relied heavily on infantry holding defensive lines, supported by limited artillery and entrenched positions. The Tank Division had around 120 tanks earlier in June 1941, but despite this earlier recording, there were nowhere near as many of these tanks present at Petrikowka. The T-26 light tank became the backbone of the Soviet armour for the first few months of Operation Barbarossa. There were Soviet infantry dug in, remaining behind minefields and well-defended positions in and around the town, fiercely resisting the encircling Italians, engaging in house-to-house fighting when Italians advanced into key urban areas. The Soviet infantry and the 47th Tank Division put up a tenacious fight, with the minefields halting some advances and the light tanks providing limited counter-attacks. Italian infantry would have had to approach the town through the steppes, carefully negotiating these minefields. The Vesubio had prior experience of clearing mines, which facilitated the advance into Petrikowka. The Torino Division were also successful in navigating treacherous routes into the town. The Bersaglieri were also well equipped and trained in mine clearing. This allowed the Bersaglieri regiments to clear paths in the minefields relatively quickly to advance into the town and put the pressure on Soviet defensive positions. Despite the stiff resistance, the Italians succeeded in breaking through key points, including near Petrikowka itself. The encirclement was nearly complete, with Soviet forces attempting to break out through gaps in the lines. The open terrain outside of the town and minefields made these attempts costly for the Soviets. Despite the Soviets having superior armour with their small number of tanks, the Italians did manage to get the upper hand. The Italian infantry divisions each had a few companies of anti-tank weaponry that came mainly in the form of the Cannoni da 47-32 guns. But looking at the divisions and what they had available and their type of fighting, I have surmised that a lot of the disruptions and destruction of the Soviet armoured units were conducted through infantry operations. Italian infantry were trained on how to combat mechanisation. They would practice manoeuvres as part of their military training before deployment. The lack of numbers of Soviet tanks gave them a much better chance where tanks could be isolated, presenting easier targets than if there were consolidated numbers of tanks in formation. Italian infantry facing Soviet tanks in close combat, especially with limited anti-tank weaponry, would have employed several tactics beyond just laying mines. Firstly, ambush and close assaults would be a common tactic. Infantry could close in on tanks using terrain cover and concealment to launch surprise attacks from the sides or rear, where armour was thinner. They might attack with hand grenades and petrol bombs or improvised explosives to target tracks and other vulnerable points. Having done further research prior to this video, it seems most likely that Italian infantry did not have anti-tank rifles, such as the Solothurn on the Eastern Front, especially early in the campaign under the CSIR. Anti-tank rifles were prioritised for the Bersaglieri regiments fighting on the North African Front. Italian infantry had access to anti-tank hand grenades like the Type L. The Type L grenade was effective if thrown within about 15 to 20 metres, and the soldier would have to quickly take cover for protection against fragmentation. The grenade was capable of damaging tank tracks to disable the vehicle. Improvised explosives and satchel charges could also be used to immobilise tanks by damaging tracks or engine compartments. Infantry also worked closely with available artillery to focus fire on tanks and enemy infantry support, softening defences and forcing tanks into areas where infantry could attack more safely. The Italians had another ace up their sleeve when encountering the 47th Tank Division, the Bersaglieri. The 2 battalions of Bersaglieri sent from the 3rd Artillery Division would have been mobilised, most likely deployed in auto-transportation like the Fiat 666 or 626 troop transporters, as well as motorcycles. They could intercept routes of retreat in urban areas quickly, destroying roads or other infrastructure that would restrict tank movement and create vulnerabilities for close infantry attacks. This infantry corps was all about rapid assaults that could clear areas of enemy infantry quickly, exposing isolated tanks. Together, these tactics helped compensate for the Italians' limited anti-tank weaponry during battles like Petrikowka by focusing on disabling tanks in close quarters, using surprise terrain and combined arms to disrupt Soviet armoured capabilities. Infantry do not always have to destroy a tank. If they can disable it in some way, it can force a tank crew to evacuate. The infantry's primary role is to neutralize the tank's ability to fight. This can be achieved by damaging its tracks, weapons, or other critical components. It's possible that some of the T-26 tanks or other vehicles used by the Soviets present at Petrikowka were captured, but unlikely that they were still operational. The CSIR were unlikely to use them, and in any case the Germans ordered that captured vehicles should be handed over to them. The final encirclement at the Battle of Petrikowka was a coordinated multi-division effort that successfully trapped Soviet forces in a tightening pocket. General Giovanni Messer's plan for a classic pincer movement was working, and the objective to cut off Soviet retreat routes looked likely. On the morning of September the 29th, 1941, both the Torino and Pasubio divisions pressed forward to join forces in the town of Petrikowka. This movement was crucial in sealing the pocket around the withdrawing Soviet 47th Tank Division and associated infantry units. The Torino Division's vanguard was the first to reach Petrikowka, where they linked up with the Pasubio Division's elements around 6 o'clock in the evening. These Italian infantry units engaged with remnants of Soviet infantry who were desperately trying to hold defensive positions. The Soviet infantry in the pocket, though weakened, fought intensely to slow the Italian advance, using fortified positions and the natural river barriers of the nearby Chapelinka River to defend. The Soviets would often use houses, destroyed buildings and surrounding rubble as fortifications where infantry were well dug in. These improvised strongpoints would likely hold Soviet machine gun squads and snipers. The Italian infantry had the job of darting in and out of rubble and buildings and maintaining pressure on defensive positions. It was intense urban fighting. Meanwhile, the 3rd Celery Duca d'Aosta Division played a pivotal role in the final phase by deploying 2 Bersaglieri battalions across the Dnieper River in a sweeping movement. These highly mobile and elite infantry units were tasked with the critical job of surrounding the encircled area, rounding up Soviet soldiers attempting to break through or hide in the town. The Bersaglieri's speed and aggressive tactics helped prevent Soviet breakout attempts, pushing scattered troops into surrender or annihilation. They conducted thorough clearing operations throughout the trapped Soviet forces, moving systematically to secure both urban and rural areas within the pocket. German forces also contributed to the encirclement from the north, supporting the Italian pincers. This northern pressure helped close the ring, preventing Soviet forces from escaping and ensuring that the pocket tightened from all sides. This helped the Italians with sweeping operations to clear and secure the encircled area around Petrikowka. The German assaults from the north synchronized with the Italian advances, creating a comprehensive blockade that squeezed the Soviet 47th Tank Division's older light tanks and infantry within the shrinking encirclement. These German units disrupted any organised Soviet countermoves ultimately contributing to the complete containment of the Soviet forces. Together, the Italian infantry and bersaglieri battalions, supported by the Germans pressing from the north, completed the encirclement by cutting off Soviet escape routes and forcing the disorganised Soviet infantry and tank units deeper into the pocket. The 81st and 82nd Infantry Regiments of Torino and the Tagliamento Legion engaged retreating Soviet units and also played a key role. The careful coordination and persistence of these combined forces ensured that the encirclement was sealed, ending the battle with a significant tactical victory for the Axis in the region. This thorough encirclement, marked by determined infantry clashes and methodical clearing operations by the bersaglieri, was a textbook example of a combined arms pincer movement, closing to trap enemy forces with little room for escape. The sweeping operations ended on the 30th of September 1941, a victory for the CSIR. Intense fighting on the steppes and within the urban areas of Petrikowka resulted in casualties for both forces, but the Italian casualties were relatively low compared to the Soviet forces. Italian casualties mounted to 291, with 87 killed, 190 wounded and 14 missing. I have not managed to find any data on the numbers of Soviet soldiers killed and wounded at Petrikowka, but due to the size and scale of the battle, they would be considerable. 10,000 Soviet soldiers were taken prisoner, along with large quantities of weapons and equipment captured. While there are not specific details, it is possible that Soviet tanks were abandoned and captured, but whether they were intact and operational is unknown. It is most likely that there were no captured tanks available for operational use. The battle showcased effective Italian combined arms tactics in coordination with German forces in encircling Soviet units, but the Italians faced fierce resistance and had to clear minefields to maintain momentum. The Battle of Petrikowka had a notable positive impact on Italian morale and shaped perceptions of Italy's role on the Eastern Front in important ways. The victory at Petrikowka was the first significant success for the Italian Expeditionary Corps in Russia and provided a much-needed boost to the troops' confidence. The Italian soldiers' ability to successfully execute a complex pincer movement, break through Soviet defences and capture approximately 10,000 prisoners made it a proud moment amid generally difficult and brutal conditions on the Eastern Front. This victory helped affirm their combat effectiveness when adequately led and coordinated, contributing to higher morale among Italian forces. The battle's success also strengthened the military cooperation between Italy and Germany. The Italian Expeditionary Corps operated alongside German forces, and their effective operations at Petrikowka was likely seen positively by the German command, fostering better relations within the Axis coalition. Such victories demonstrated Italy's commitment and capability on the Eastern Front, which helped improve Italy's standing with its dominant German ally at that point in the war. Before Operation Barbarossa, relations had been strained, Hitler even leaving Italy in the dark about his plan for the invasion of the Soviet Union. During the Battle of Petrikowka, General Giovanni Messer demonstrated effective and experienced leadership, which was crucial to the Italian victory. As commander of the CSIR, Messer orchestrated a well-planned pincer movement involving the Vesubio and Torino divisions to encircle Soviet forces at Petrikowka. His decision to coordinate bridgehead formations along the Dnieper River and then use them as launching points reflects his tactical foresight and ability to execute complex manoeuvres jointly with German forces. Messer's leadership was characterised by rigorous preparation, as evident from the Vesubio division's careful minefield clearing prior to the assault, which facilitated a successful advance despite Soviet resistance. Under his command, the Italian divisions maintained cohesion and momentum, managing to inflict heavy losses on the Soviets while sustaining relatively light casualties themselves. This battle was Messer's first major engagement on the Eastern Front, setting a precedent for Italian operations there. His command style combined calm operational planning with aggressive offensive action, contributing significantly to the capture of many Soviet prisoners and securing a morale-boosting victory for Italy. His leadership earned him respect from both Italian forces and their German allies, and it became a highlight of Italy's Eastern Front campaign before the arrival of the larger Armia forces later in the war. Although the battle was a bright spot, the broader campaign on the Eastern Front would become far more costly and challenging for Italy. Nevertheless, Petrikowka remained a symbol of Italian military prowess and was remembered as one of the few notable victories in a harsh and brutal theatre. It contributed to the narrative of Italian soldierly honour and resilience amidst the broader difficulties faced later in the campaign.